capitalist countries. Today we are the most unequal because after the eruption of the 1930s from below, squashing the inequality, we undid the New Deal. You've all lived through that. So that now capitalism can resume its normal tendency, which is the Bezos effect. We've tried everything to deal with this inequality. We have school programs and training programs. It's endless creative reforms that don't work. And they never have, not for very long. Back in 1960, an American socialist, Michael Harrington, writes a book, The Other America, shocking the American public, who had gone to sleep in the 1950s, with the fact that, yes, there's a lot of poverty here. You start looking at American literature, you discover roughly every 20 years in the United States, someone comes along and says, Eureka! Poverty! All over the place. You know, the first time this is exciting. The second time you're still shocked. And the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth time, we ought to realize this is a systemic problem. You're not going to solve inequality unless you're able and willing to begin to think about a different system, because you're not solving the problem. Let me be as blunt as I can in a couple of ways. I like to use the metaphor of the refrigerator. Many of you have had the experience I've had. An old refrigerator, deeply beloved, but it's beginning to bring the refrigerator repair man or woman a bit too often. And they come and they twiddle and they fiddle and they charge $284. And 3 weeks later, they're back. This time it's not the motor, it's the condenser. It's not the condenser, it's the this, it's the coils, it's the whatever. You can't keep it straight. They're probably making it up anyway. And then that moment comes because it's a nice person who comes to your house. That's why you have them come to fix the refrigerator. And with a certain kind of hangdog look, they stare you in the face and they say, look, I could take another $284, but you'll see me again in 3 weeks. I'm afraid the problem is you can't fix this refrigerator anymore. You've got to get a new one. You can't fix this capitalism anymore. It's dying. I really think so. And the question is whether it's going to take us all down with it. And I think that has to be faced, not just metaphorically, but directly. And here I am in a college, so let me use that as a final example of reform. Almost everyone I know in the economics profession would subscribe to the following sentence: that the future of the American economy in the larger world economy will depend as much or more on the following as on anything else: the quality and the quantity of trained young people. Where do they get training? In colleges and universities. Okay. We have, I don't know, roughly 18, 20 million people in colleges and universities in the United States. About 3/4 of them in public school and 1/4 in private school. So the key of the American future in the economy is a public service organized by the government. I just want to let that sink in for some of you who don't know these sorts of little numbers. What are we doing? One state out of 50 has increased the amount of money over the last few years that it gives for public higher education. The other 49 have cut it, in some cases drastically. Let me do it again. The future of our economy depends on the opposite of what we are as a nation doing. To make it even harder for young people, as the governments cut back their support, the schools raise the prices, the tuition, the fees, and all the rest of it, because they have to pay for all of that. At a time when the economy is providing poorer jobs with fewer benefits, which force the young people to borrow ridiculous amounts of money in order to get the degree which will get them a poorer job than it used to, paying less than they need to pay off the loan. This is a description of an insane operation. It makes no sense on 12 levels, putting aside the cruelty of it all. What are we doing? And for those of you who think that this is somehow built into capitalism, the answer isn't that it's built into capitalism. It's one of those options capitalists can pursue under certain conditions. Not all capitalists do. Germany this last year finished its program of reducing the tuition cost at all German universities to zero. To zero. By the way, this may be of interest to some undergraduates. Zero is the price applied not only to German citizens, but to any citizen of any country. You can go to Germany and you can go to school for nothing. You have to pay your room and board, but you do not pay school fees. And Germany is only one of, I believe, 7 countries in Europe that are now doing that. But of course in Europe you have a powerful socialist and communist and union movement that makes all these things happen. Just like we had a powerful union and socialist and communist movement in the 1930s that gave us Social Security, unemployment compensation, the first minimum wage, and a public jobs program. The reason we don't have those things today, you really do know, you don't need me for this. We don't have those things today because we don't have that movement today. And we don't have that movement today because after World War II, that movement was destroyed systematically in this country by the government and the business community working together. Identify the communists, get rid of them, then go after the socialists on the grounds that they were just like the communists, and then when you're done with them, go after the trade unions who are liberals, and that's sort of like socialist and communist too. You know that. We all grew up in this, still here with us. So we didn't solve the problem of education. Capitalism has never been able to. The capitalists fought public education in the middle of the 19th century when we began it in this country. After World War II, they were grudgingly forced into it by the very union, socialist, communist operations of that time. Now that those movements are gone, it's being eviscerated. Many of you know that public higher education is veering more and more toward the model of the community college, which is a variation on the vocational. You get the picture, or at least you should. So the point. These things happen because that's how this system works. It's not that the people who wanted to make reforms didn't mean it. They did. They were sincere. They tried hard. They came up with this reform and that reform and the next reform and the other reform, and they tried it and they put them into effect and they worked hard and they provided money where they had political power to do it. It didn't work like the repairs at the end of the refrigerator. It doesn't work anymore. And you have to be able, at least as a nation, to ask the question, is this a systemic problem? And if it is, what are we going to do about that? Pretend not? We've been pretending for half a century. We've been pretending in this country that there might be this problem or that problem. But capitalism as a system, why, that is simply wonderful. It's the best thing. Some of you saw that wonderful moment back in 2016 when Nancy Pelosi, one of your folks here in California, was asked a question by a young man, if I remember, at a school someplace. He said something about young people his age are beginning to get interested in socialism again, and what did she, they preferred socialism to capitalism, or some words like that, and what did she think about that? And you could see, if you've seen the clip, the total befuddlement on Nancy Pelosi. She really acted like she had never heard such a question, that it was a question kind of, from the moon. So she looked at the young man and said, kind of dismissively, we're all capitalists now, or words like that. I thought that was a wonderful moment. I think she's exactly right. The Republicans and Democrats are all capitalists because for 50 years, your loyalty as an American meant that you endorsed, you supported, you enthused over capitalism. Certainly my education, and I'll mention it for no other reason, believe me, since I'm no fan of any of these institutions. I went to Harvard, then to Stanford, and then to Yale. I'm a poster boy for American elite education, the only schools I ever attended. I was never taught how to analyze capitalism. I was taught to be a cheerleader for capitalism. And that's what my professors were doing. They were giving me 400 reasons why capitalism is really the best thing since sliced bread, probably better. I was not required, just to get it, I was not required to read one word of Karl Marx to get my PhD at Yale at the end, or at Stanford, or at Harvard. This is so childish, it's almost embarrassing to tell you this. What kind of a society behaves like this? We were asked to read Adam Smith and David Ricardo and Marshall and all the other Keynes and all the other leading lights of people who liked capitalism. And I'm glad we were asked to read them. I have no objection to that at all. But to give us nothing of the criticism? No writer who says this system is a problem? No critical perspective? What kind of education is this? Well, there's a technical term for this kind of education. Crappy. Yes, it's no accident, but I don't say phrases like it's no accident because they have bad association. Okay. So I wanted to argue with you that the system is the problem, and that the system is what we have to worry about and deal with. And otherwise we're spinning our wheels, and the situation, which is bad, is going to get worse, not better. The signs of that, I hope you see almost everywhere around you, despite all the efforts that you not see them. One of the signs is the President of the United States. No, I mean that very seriously. What are you seeing? How is it that that's the President, that can function like that? Say these things, do these things. For the last 40 years, just to get at one nodule here, for the last 40 years, we've had an unprecedented great run of the stock market. It's had terrible crashes, but if you look over the 40 years, wow. The rich have gotten wildly richer because they're the ones who own the shares. Corporations have done spectacularly. What you didn't need last December was a tax bill that amply rewarded the people who did best over the last 40 years and plainly and obviously don't need it. What's going on? What makes a society do that? Why would they do that? Why is that necessary? Why do we have people in the government for whom this is self-evidently good policy? Those people are not thinking like you do. They have no relationship with the calculations we make, you make, I make, and most Americans make. That's why they have to tell you fancy stories that aren't true about what they're doing. This is a tax cut that'll help everybody. No, it won't. This is a tax cut that really costs me dearly, says Mr. Trump. No, it doesn't. And the newspapers are all frightened by this spectacle of knowing that what the man is saying is patently silly and contrary to everything everybody knows. But that's an important symptom of something, that kind of thing. Or take the British. The British working class, for those of you not familiar with it, has been the most savaged of all advanced countries' working classes since 2008. The real wages have dropped about 15%. Americans have not had 12 to 15%. A spectacular attack on the working class of Great Britain. So bad has it been there the crash and now the consequences of the crash, that the British working class has turned on the governing elites. And how did they do that? Bizarre. They had an election a year or so ago on a subject nobody knows much about, nobody understands real well, nobody thought about much. Should Britain stay in the European Union or not? I'm not going to embarrass you by asking you how passionately you feel on that subject. Because I know that you don't feel passionately on the subject. You don't half understand what the issue is. Neither do they. So something bizarre happened. The leading conservative government, the guy who literally ran the show, made the decision to call the vote, says you must stay in Europe. The Labour Party, the number 2 party there, much more calmly and mildly, but basically also endorses it. And the mass of the British working class, seeing what the elite is in favor of, votes it down. With the same gusto, the same middle finger erect. Exact same move as made in this country to vote for Donald Trump. Does it solve your problem? It has nothing to do with your problem. The British working class are better off in or out of Europe. It doesn't matter. They're being screwed by British capital, and that's going to continue either way. If they don't want to get screwed, then they're going to have to do something about the system they're living in, not voting on extraneous matters that really aren't germane and that just become germane because of the rage. But Britain is being severely impacted by all the costs associated with what they're doing. The Europeans are now seeing a future for them, minus England. England will become the, I don't mean to hurt anyone's feelings here, but England will become even more of the poodle, if you know the British language, that they were accused of being over the last several years anyway of the American government. Although they're being given a run for their money by the new leader in France who wishes to be the #1 poodle, and so outmaneuvered. And he's in Washington today working on that project as hard as he can. He's a sad man. He's President Macaroon. Unfortunate name. So I want to talk about the system. And in order for me to talk about the system, I have to make sure, which is not easy, that we are all on the same page by what we mean about capitalism as a system. And I say that because I know we're not on the same page. For example, the New York Times, when it refers to capitalism, uses the word synonymously with free market, private enterprise. Okay? Now, if I were mean-spirited, which I try not